love being a Buddhist. And I love that I get to be a Buddhist as an Asian and as an Asian American with an Asian lineage, um, in this moment in the West, in the US, and I get to have the space to speak and say, this experience is valuable and matters, and listen to Asian Buddhists. And like I want to like put that in a big banner. Listen to Asian Buddhists. Learn from Asian Buddhists. Learn from lay Buddhists, because there is that lived experience. These are my siblings, these are my sisters, these are my aunties. And in this way of like, oh, yeah, because it's woven into the fabric of who we are culturally and familially and community wise. And it's not like, oh, this is some scholar that, there's this separation, there's this invitation in.
I think if we're framing inaction as the high road, then the high road isn't for me. I don't think it's consonant with Buddhism. And there are so many examples that just prove it wrong, that perspective. There's so many examples of Buddhists engaging politically, engaging socially, and in a way, Buddhism has always been political, either by maintaining an oppressive status quo, or by, addressing aspects of it. For example, the well-known aspects of the Shakyamuni Buddha's Sangha, being open to all people, inclusive of gender and caste, a very radical political statement. And ever since then, there have been examples of Buddhists engaging socially and politically. So I don't agree that that's the high road. At the same time, I think that how we engage politically and socially is a serious question.
Pule called kaikukuru, which means be a pillar. Stand and be a pillar. Come be a pillar. What are pillars in our community? These are people that you esteem because they stand for something. They have integrity. It's just asking 4 questions like, why be a pillar? It asks 4 times, so there's 4 answers. The first answer is the mauna, the mountain. That's why we're being a pillar here. The second one, the ahu, the altar, the sacred. The third is the pohaku, the stone. That's the land. The aina is a rock, strong. And finally, why be a pillar? For the people, kanaka. So we repeat this, 3 times. And so there's some ami, circular movements of the hips as you're making the hand motions, because you're dancing, being a pillar. That is hula as resistance.
In Dharma, we say that figures like Avalokiteshvara or Karando, she responds to the cries of the world. When we talk about Avalokiteshvara in Dharma, we often say that she responds with her many hands and eyes with compassion to what's going on in the world. There's that very famous exchange with Suzuki Roshi that goes back to the early days of San Francisco Zen Center, where people are out in the streets protesting the Vietnam War, and one of his students says famously, we should be out there, and he says, no, you should be in here. And you should cultivate the equanimity, the silence, the productivity of doing nothing. And I have often heard it said in moments of kind of great political angst, people refer back to that. And I think that's not a tried and true, one size fits all kind of an admonition. I do think there are appropriate times for peaceful protest. I think I've said earlier in this podcast, when I was a kid, my parents dragged me. And, when you're a kid, you get dragged to stuff. I got dragged to a anti-Vietnam War march when I was, 12, 10. And I'm pretty sure I saw Suzuki Roshi dressed in his probably like a ceremonial robe. And I saw him up on Geary Street in San Francisco. And I remember I looked up this street because everybody was staring at this guy in gold robes. But even he came out then. So I think that's important to note.
But as I looked more deeply and just reflected and shared time in community and Sangha spaces, just recognizing like the deep wounds that were there. And I named it as intergenerational shame and sorrow, because I really felt like that as a child, that there was like this really deep shame in not only our family, but in our culture of things we don't talk about. Just the terms that my family even used were just very soft and subtle and passive and kind of like, they even called it camp. And so when I was going to school, there were some of my classmates that went to summer camp. And it was really confusing as a young person to say, oh, my parents were in camp, but this is obviously so different. And so right now, reading about Fort Bliss, it has watered a lot of those seeds, those old seeds of shame and sorrow. And so throughout the past several years, I've really been trying to look and delve more deeply in the role of trauma in not only my life, but in my family, in culture and community, and then how that reverberates into all of us who have been, touched by war, basically, and how it crosses across generations. And we don't have to be direct descendants of it, but that this war has touched us in so many ways as Americans. With the news of Fort Bliss, with the news of what's going on in our immigration courts, of people disappearing. It's just noticing all of that needs tending right now. And sometimes it does feel really overwhelming, but I think part of the responsibility of this Bodhisattva vow is to really recognize it and to note what's happening and going on in the moment. Before we can act, we have to really, feel it in our bodies. One of the places that's resonated for me is to observe and be an observer at the immigration court hearings. Sitting through my first hearing, it was really evident that that's the place that we can show up in our robes. There are many roles for other people. There are attorneys there. There are people taking notes. There are people helping immigrants with translations. There are people greeting folks at the courthouse so that they don't feel all alone. It's just one example of a way that I feel like that we as faith leaders, whatever you want to call us, that we can show up in our robes.
Part of what makes American history so important, that people continue to resist. You can resist this kind of injustice in a variety of ways, to both give a name, but also to humanize the people that are being attacked in this way. If you're a Buddhist minister, helping to publicize why this kind of injustice is simply something that you have to challenge. During World War II, it was people who were Buddhists who were assumed to be disloyal and untrustworthy. After 9/11, it was people who were Muslim. A lot of my students don't know the 1924 Immigration Act was largely focusing on Southern and Eastern Europeans who were not seen as white. When I tell them that the Irish in the 1830s, right, were not seen as white, we have this long history of othering people, and so we all need to stand up and defend the rights of people, whether they're in our community or outside of our community, because otherwise I think we're all in danger. And I was really heartened to see people saying, help us figure out how we can stand up and support the rights of others.
What I did was look at the first encounter Buddhism by the West. People like Brian Houston Hodgson. He went to India where he's working with East Indian Railroad Company. And then when he quit that job, went to Nepal, he started collecting Buddhist Sutra. And Buddhist Sutra are written in Pali or Sanskrit. So he sent these manuscripts to Europe. Those that were sent to Europe ended up on the desk of Eugene Benoff. He was a linguist. So Benoff translated like 147 or 49 volumes of the sutra that Hodgson sent him. He translated into French and wrote this humongous book on Introduction to History of Indian Buddhism. And this book became the central textbook for Buddhism in the West. And after he wrote that book, he had the audacity to say, you mean the Asian Buddhists, I know your religion better than you do. But you look at it from racial angle and religious angle, there are problems that we need to bring it up. First of all, he grew up in a culture where the assumption of European value and methodology are superior, vastly superior to anything around the world. People like Martin Luther, John Calvin, people like those, And one of the things that they claim, true locus of religion can be found in this, in this case, Christian Bible. And he's using the same principle when he was, when he was doing translating the Buddhist Sutra. He said, I translated your sutra, and I know it doesn't have anything in there about, let's say, the merit-making ceremony that your monks do in the temple. Those are cultural creation. That's not real Buddhism. The real Buddhism isn't in the sacred text that I just translated. And that comes from the Protestant notion that the locus of true religion is in the sacred text. And because he translated the Buddhist sacred text, he can claim that I know your religion better than you do.
So I'm trying to make a Buddhist Sangha in my temple. First, I started Zazen meeting, and people come one by one. Then I'm trying to connection with each of them, each other. Now I started Sangha work. In Sangha work, we do some activity together. First, we started practicing bells in temple. For Zazen or for ceremony, people really enjoy practicing ringing the bell. And it's not only ringing the bell, but it's participating in the ceremony by themselves. We are making ceremony all together.
In some ways, a reclaiming of Buddhist practice is that, one, it's not the way that's been set up by white folks who got this airspace, or let's say it, the land space. They got the land, they got the centers, to say, well, this is what it is, and to reclaim that. And we certainly hear that from a lot of our the teachers and people that we interview, that no, Buddhism looks like this. It's not what the dominant view is, which is, I meditate and I'm enlightened, and it's actually the daily rituals, the daily connection, it's the precepts, whether it's specific or the willing to be guided by it, and not always from, some ex-master, but from my grandma, from my mom, from the daily ritual cleaning, if not the altar, then the gravesite monthly or whatever. So it's these different practices and different ways in which we get to it's a reclamation of what practice is, and again, that practice is more off the cushion. And in fact, that's where our life is off the cushion.
History itself is being recast in many respects. And this has been really emblematic, too, in the ways in which the military histories and the contributions of, say, the Navajo, the code breakers, to the Japanese-American participation, particularly in the European theater. All these things, and you say soldiers are being sort of, censored or kind of removed or muted, in fact, in favor of a history which doesn't want to look back at the kinds of atrocities, that doesn't want to look back at the kinds of ways in which systemic structural racism has been reinforced through the decades. It wants to sort of literally whitewash that, right, in favor of a new narrative to make America great again.
I'm sorry to say, grow up. I'm saying that as a mommy. Not unsympathetically. I'm not being mean. I have those thoughts as well. However, grow the F up.
You want to teach the precepts. I have a book about growing up, basically, spiritually, because I think that's part of spiritual growth, is a certain kind of maturity. They're not separate, our development spiritually or otherwise. Yeah, pragmatically even. Yeah. In fact, I think with practice, I have become much more pragmatic, less idealistic. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. What you know what you can and cannot do, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we can have a growing edge, of course, to what we can do. Again, like yoga. You don't do things that you're very comfortable doing. You're always working the edge You don't want to injure yourself. And when you stretch, you want to grow into that growing edge. So let's work the growing edge.
For me, being a feminist means sensing when things are awry or gone wrong, and also tying that into rage. People are afraid of rage, but it's only when women are raging that people are afraid, right? And I talk about this in my chapter on rage and self-love. And this is from Soraya Tremouli's book, Rage Becomes Her. When a man expresses rage or anger, it must be because something's really wrong systemically. When a woman expresses rage, something must really be wrong with her. She has come undone and unhinged. And so there's a way in which my relationship to anger as a feminist is that when anger is arising, when rage is arising, it's because there's something wrong, right? And to trust that something is wrong. We have been told over and over to override our spidey senses. We have such beautiful nervous systems that can recognize harm and danger. But we are socialized to override that and accept so many things that are just wrong. And so for me, in my chapter, I talk a lot about self-love and how I can't come to self-love until I recognize that anger inside myself, not as something that needs to be tamped down, which I think a lot of the Buddhist messaging is like, oh, step away from anger, you know. But I love Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching on anger, which is to treat it like a baby, you know, just cradle it, acknowledge it. And it's not to feed it or cling to it, but to acknowledge that it's there and be able to react to that anger in a more responsive way rather than self-harm, which I think a lot of Asian Americans do. You know, it's this kind of way to express rage, not on the person or the system that's perpetuating that injustice, but we take it out on ourselves.
Sometimes I can't believe what my life has turned out to be. My life is the teaching. I mean, it's trust. And like you're saying, not every day is like this, but there's many more days now where I think, wow, what else is going to happen? Because I couldn't have imagined this 5 years ago. What about in 5 years? You know, it's not why am I alive now? It's how do I serve my purpose today is the question.
The Dharma has been through a lot. The Dharma has resilience. And by letting the Dharma be a foundation of our being, we can also tap into that resilience instead of being isolated in our identity, in our issues, in things that impact us and our immediate family. If we bring out the yogic power of Dharma, right? Like yoga means integration. Integrate, allow everything to integrate with the Dharma, through the Dharma. Then we can build a rich practice, a resilient mind, and also dream about something that is bigger and imagine something that is richer and not limited by what we're encountering at this moment. Of course, this moment is important, but we don't need to be limited by it. We can take it as what it is and still imagine something bigger. And we can only build a better and brighter future, a safer future, a more peaceful future if you can imagine it.